Ethan had always been a quiet figure in his small town, known more for his introverted nature than any remarkable achievements. But everything changed when his mother passed away. Her death left him in a state of despair that was impossible to articulate, a chasm of grief that swallowed every ounce of joy from his life. Memories of her laughter echoed in his mind, but the warmth of those memories was overshadowed by the cold reality of her absence. The world around him felt muted, a dull existence that he could no longer endure. In the months that followed, Ethan spiraled deeper into depression. He withdrew from friends and family, isolating himself in the small apartment they had shared. He felt like a ghost, haunting the remnants of a life that once held promise. His girlfriend, Hannah, tried to support him, but the weight of his sorrow became too much for her to bear. "You need to find a way to heal, Ethan," she said one evening, her voice trembling with concern. "I can't watch you drown in this darkness." Her words, meant to be comforting, felt like a final blow. When she left, Ethan was utterly alone, and the thought of ending his own life became increasingly enticing. He envisioned a peaceful reunion with his mother, a way to escape the pain that had consumed him. But before he could take that final step, a darker resolve began to take shape. He thought about those who had wronged him and his family, bully after bully, neighbor after neighbor, all the people who had caused pain and suffering. Ethan decided that before he took his own life, he would make them pay for the hurt they had inflicted on him and his mother. It was a twisted sense of justice that took root in his mind, a way to reclaim some power in a life that felt utterly powerless. As the COVID-19 pandemic continued to ravage the world, Ethan saw a unique opportunity. The virus was a silent killer, spreading fear and uncertainty, and he realized he could harness it as a weapon. He spent countless hours researching the virus, learning about its transmission and effects. He meticulously crafted a plan to infect those he deemed deserving of punishment. It was a dark and dangerous path, but it filled him with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in months. Within 2 weeks, he had infected his first target, Jake, a former classmate who had bullied him throughout high school. They met at a local bar, where Ethan pretended to engage in friendly conversation. When Jake excused himself to the restroom, Ethan slipped a vial of virus-laden liquid into Jake's drink. The thrill of the act coursed through him, a rush that drowned out the guilt that tugged at the edges of his consciousness. Days later, Jake fell ill, becoming part of a mysterious surge in COVID-19 cases in the area. News outlets reported on the sudden spike, and Ethan felt a dark satisfaction swell within him. Buoyed by his initial success, Ethan expanded his efforts, employing increasingly creative methods to infect others. At a crowded concert, he mingled among fans, deliberately coughing into his hands before touching shared surfaces like railings and drink cups. He made sure to position himself near his next target, an old neighbor who had ignored his mother's pleas for help. When the neighbor fell ill days later, Ethan reveled in the chaos he had unleashed. The holiday season provided another opportunity. Invited to a gathering, he brought a batch of cookies laced with the virus, watching with dark satisfaction as guests enjoyed the treats. The media buzzed about the outbreak, and the nickname, the Harbinger, began to circulate, striking both fear and intrigue into the hearts of the community. Ethan's methods grew bolder. At a grocery store, he encountered another target, an old classmate who had mocked him during his darkest days. He feigned a friendly conversation, offering to help her reach for an item on a high shelf. In that brief moment of contact, he managed to transfer the virus through a handshake, adding another life to his growing tally. As the months passed, Ethan's confidence grew. He attended office parties and community events, strategically placing himself among those he deemed deserving of punishment. Each successful infection felt like a personal victory, a small step toward reclaiming the power he had lost. He watched with morbid fascination as the number of cases climbed, the community gripped by fear and uncertainty. However, the weight of his actions began to take a toll. The faces of his victims haunted him, their pain a stark contrast to the satisfaction he had initially felt. The darkness that had fueled his mission morphed into something more sinister, a gnawing guilt that clawed at his insides. Each new infection felt like a betrayal of the very values his mother had instilled in him. As the authorities closed in on the Harbinger, Ethan became a fugitive, slipping through the cracks of society. He changed his appearance, adopting various disguises and avoiding any place he might be recognized. The thrill of evasion became an addictive game, but the anxiety of being caught gnawed at him relentlessly. Every siren that echoed in the distance sent his heart racing, amplifying his paranoia. He felt like a hunted animal, constantly on edge. Despite the fear, the notoriety fed his twisted sense of power. He reveled in the media coverage, watching as reports of his actions spread across the nation. The public debated whether he was a villain or a vigilante, and Ethan found himself both horrified and exhilarated by the attention. It was a double-edged sword, a constant reminder of the chaos he had created. With over 200 people infected, the community was in a state of panic. Hospitals overflowed with patients, and Ethan watched as fear gripped the town he had once called home. But soon, the adrenaline that had fueled him began to fade, replaced by a crushing sense of despair. He realized that his actions had not brought him closer to his mother. Instead, they had deepened his isolation, leaving him more alone than ever. One night, while hiding in a rundown motel, Ethan stumbled across a news report that shook him to his core. The anchor spoke of the toll the virus had taken on families, lives lost, dreams shattered, and communities torn apart. As he listened, the weight of his actions crashed over him like a tidal wave. The very pain he sought to inflict had come back to haunt him, and he could no longer bear the burden. In that moment of clarity, Ethan made a decision. He could no longer be the Harbinger. He would come forward, confess his actions, and face the consequences of his choices. It was time to seek redemption, to honor his mother's memory in a way that didn't involve more death and suffering. As he prepared to turn himself in, Ethan felt a flicker of hope amidst the darkness. It was a long road ahead, but he knew that redemption was possible, even for someone who had strayed so far from the path. He had the chance to reclaim his humanity and find a way to heal, not just for himself, but for the countless lives he had affected. In seeking forgiveness, perhaps he could find the peace he had been so desperately searching for since the day he lost his mother. Ethan's decision to turn himself in was not made lightly. He spent sleepless nights wrestling with the gravity of his actions and what they meant for his future. The thought of facing judgment and the wrath of the community filled him with dread, but it was also a relief. He knew he could no longer bear the burden of being the Harbinger. The name had become a haunting reminder of the darkness he had embraced. The next morning, Ethan gathered his courage and stepped out of the motel room for what he hoped would be the last time. The sun cast a harsh light on his face, illuminating the turmoil that had become his constant companion. As he walked toward the police station, he felt a mix of fear and determination. Each step echoed the weight of his past, but it also felt like a step toward a new beginning. When he arrived at the station, he hesitated at the entrance, uncertainty flooding him. But his resolve hardened as he thought of his mother, her kindness, her compassion, and her unwavering belief in the goodness of people. He stepped inside, the cool air hitting him like a wave. The receptionist looked up in surprise as he approached, and with a shaky voice, he said, "I need to speak to someone. I want to confess." The officers quickly took him into a private room, and Ethan found himself facing two detectives. They regarded him with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. "What do you want to confess?" one of them asked, leaning forward, his pen poised over a notepad. Ethan took a deep breath, the words tumbling out in a rush. He recounted his journey, from the pain of his mother's death to the dark path he had chosen in his grief. He detailed the names of those he had infected and the methods he had used, confessing each act with a heavy heart. As he spoke, tears streamed down his face, each drop a release of the anguish he had held inside for so long. The detectives listened intently, their expressions shifting from skepticism to concern. When he finished, the room was silent, the weight of his confession hanging in the air. "You understand the severity of what you've done?" one detective finally asked, his voice steady. "Yes," Ethan replied, his voice cracking. "I know I can't undo it. But I want to face the consequences. I can't keep living like this." After a lengthy conversation, Ethan was taken into custody. The reality of his situation began to sink in as he was processed. Handcuffed and placed in a cell, he felt the crushing weight of his decisions. He had traded his freedom for a chance at redemption, but the path ahead was fraught with uncertainty. As news of his confession broke, the media frenzy intensified. Headlines blared about the harbinger, who had terrorized the community, the man who had turned the pandemic into a weapon. Public opinion was divided. Some viewed him as a monster, while others felt a strange sense of sympathy for a man driven to madness by grief. Online forums buzzed with heated debates, and Ethan found himself at the center of a storm he could hardly comprehend. In the weeks that followed, Ethan faced the legal consequences of his actions. He was charged with multiple counts of assault and reckless endangerment. The courtroom was packed with reporters, victims' families, and community members eager to see justice served. As he sat in the defendant's chair, he felt the weight of their stares, the anger and pain radiating from those he had harmed. During the trial, survivors of his actions took the stand to share their stories. One mother spoke of her child who had fallen ill due to Ethan's actions, her voice trembling with emotion. "You took away our peace of mind," she said, tears streaming down her face. "You didn't think about the lives you were ruining." Ethan listened, his heart breaking with each testimony. He had wanted to inflict pain, but he had never imagined the extent of the suffering he would cause. It was a brutal awakening, and he felt the full weight of his guilt crashing down upon him. Despite the overwhelming evidence against him, Ethan's defense team argued for leniency, citing his mental state at the time of the crimes. They painted a picture of a man who had lost everything, a victim of his own grief. The prosecution, however, maintained that his actions were premeditated and malicious. After days of testimony, the jury deliberated. When the verdict was finally read, Ethan felt as though the ground had fallen away beneath him. Guilty. The word echoed in his mind, a final judgment on his actions. As he was led away to serve his sentence, Ethan felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. He had faced the consequences of his choices, and while the reality of prison was daunting, he understood that it was a necessary step in his quest for redemption. He hoped that in time, he could transform the pain he had caused into something meaningful. In prison, Ethan was given access to therapy and support groups, where he began to confront the demons that had driven him to such darkness. He shared his story with others who had experienced loss, finding solace in their shared pain. It was a long and arduous journey, but slowly, he began to heal. Ethan wrote letters of apology to the families affected by his actions, offering his remorse and a commitment to change. Some letters were met with anger, while others were received with a cautious understanding. He knew that he could never undo the harm he had caused, but he wanted to prove that he could be better, that he could honor his mother's memory in a way that brought healing rather than destruction. As the months turned into years, Ethan's transformation became evident. He became involved in programs aimed at helping others cope with grief and loss, sharing his journey with those who needed support. He found purpose in helping others navigate their pain, using his experiences as a cautionary tale about the consequences of unchecked emotions. Through it all, Ethan never forgot the pain he had caused. He carried it with him as a reminder of the man he once was, a harbinger of despair. But he also embraced the hope of redemption, knowing that even in the darkest of circumstances, healing was possible. He had learned that true strength lay not in inflicting pain, but in seeking forgiveness and choosing compassion. In the end, Ethan's journey was one of transformation, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. He had faced the darkness within himself and emerged with a renewed sense of purpose, committed to making amends for his past. And in honoring his mother's memory, he found a way to live again, not in the shadow of despair, but in the light of hope and healing. As the years passed in prison, Ethan wrestled with the weight of his choices and the consequences of his actions. He had dedicated himself to personal growth, participating in therapy and support groups, trying to make sense of the pain and suffering he had caused. Yet, despite his efforts to transform into a person who could honor his mother's memory, he found that the darkness lingered. The guilt never truly dissipated. Every day, he was reminded of the faces of those he had harmed, the families shattered by his actions. The prison walls, once a place of reflection and potential redemption, now felt like a suffocating cage. No matter how hard he tried to atone for his sins, the enormity of what he had done hung over him like a shroud. Ethan's mental health began to deteriorate. The isolation and the weight of his guilt created a storm inside him that he could no longer endure. He found himself spiraling into despair, and the hope that had once flickered in his heart began to fade. He realized that no amount of good he could do would ever erase the past, and the pain of his existence became unbearable. One fateful evening, after another grueling day of introspection, Ethan sat alone in his cell, the darkness closing in around him. He thought of his mother, of the warmth of her embrace, and the love she had given him. In his mind, he envisioned her waiting for him, a beacon of light in the endless void he had created. The longing for peace and reunion became overwhelming. In that moment of despair, Ethan made a choice that he believed would finally bring him solace. He wrote a letter to the families he had hurt, expressing his deepest remorse and wishing them peace. He explained that he could no longer bear the burden of his actions and that he hoped they would find healing in their own lives. With tears streaming down his face, Ethan took a deep breath, feeling the weight lift from his shoulders as he prepared to take the final step. He knew that in his darkness, he had found a twisted sense of resolution. The thought of being with his mother again, free from the pain and guilt that had consumed him, felt like a long-awaited release. That night, Ethan took his own life in the confines of his prison cell, leaving behind a world that had felt too heavy for him to carry any longer. In his final moments, he hoped for forgiveness, not just from those he had wronged, but from himself. He sought peace in a way he believed was only possible in death, finally free from the shackles of his sorrow. As the news of his death spread, it sent ripples through the community that had once labeled him the Harbinger. Some felt closure, while others grappled with the tragedy of a life lost to the darkness. But for Ethan, the journey had come to an end. In seeking to reunite with the love he had lost, he had made a choice that would forever echo in the hearts of those who had been touched by his story.